Great. Okay, cool. Well, we can go ahead and get started. For those that don't know me, my name's Kyle Farmer. I'm the owner of Farmer Enterprises, Farmer Law PC, and AW Labor Solutions. We deal a lot with TN visas, among other visas, but TN visas are heavily used within our business. And I'm sure many of you have noticed the latest trends on TN visas, where it seems like the consulate is, I mean, obviously, according to the data, the consulate is denying a much larger percentage of these TN visas than they have historically, and that's not necessarily the biggest problem. I think the biggest problem is not understanding why, and there's not a clear answer on that. The denials have been pretty arbitrary. They've been vocalized one way to the candidate, and then it's documented a different way. Just a tremendous amount of inconsistency within the consulate. And I guess just to back up a little bit, the reason for that is because I think that the consulate is having a hard time determining how they should treat TN visas. Because the consulate's concern is that the TN visa is being misused or misapplied, and they don't have a great enforcement mechanism on the other side to go and make sure that the employers are properly using the TNs. And so with all TN applications, just like with anything else, you want to be honest with what the workers are going to be doing. You want to give a thorough job description and make sure that the workers are working within that job description. The big concern for the consulate is that there were reports of people just completely misusing their TN. So a person would come in on a TN visa for, you name it, as a engineer and go work in a hotel or something like that. A lot of it was in the manufacturing process. And the issue is that the consulate hasn't really applied it to a specific industry or a specific employer type. But those in agriculture, those in construction that use TN visas a lot and use them properly have been kind of collateral damage to the consulate's approval and denial systems that they're using right now. And I use the word systems tentatively because it's not really systemized, which is part of the problem, but we'll get into it in a little bit. And so it's becoming more and more important that people know how to properly prepare a TN visa and how to navigate the TN process to at least maximize your likelihood of success. And so that's what we're going to talk about here. I'm going to share my screen here. For anyone that has questions, please, at the top of the screen as we go through, it says Q&A. Put your questions in the Q&A. Don't put them in the chat because we want them to be private. So I won't say what your name is whenever I'm reading the question. But put them in the Q&A as we go through here, and I'll answer any questions that you might have at the end of the webinar. So we're going to be talking about navigating the TN visa challenges, and I'm going to give you an overview of what is the TN visa, go through the consular process, the consular denials, and talk about some change of status and changes in employers and those sorts of options. So just at a glance is what we're going over. This is our mission statement. In the face of evolving immigration challenges, our mission is to provide comprehensive, innovative, and creative solutions that address labor shortages, ensure legal compliance, and meet the evolving needs of businesses for sustainable growth. So let's talk real quick, just because I don't know everyone's familiarity with the TN visa. What is the TN visa? The TN visa is a non-immigrant visa that allows professionals specifically from Mexico or Canada to work temporarily in the United States. What that means is that they need to be either Mexican or Canadian citizens. I've seen permanent residents try of those countries wanting to apply for TNs, and that doesn't work. They have to be citizens of those countries, and they have to have a professional degree. And this is another thing, is their professional degree does not have to be from Mexico or Canada. So they just need to have a bachelor's degree or the equivalent. I've seen circumstances where folks are coming in from Canada, they're Canadian citizens, but they have a bachelor's degree from India, and that's totally fine. It was originally created as part of NAFTA, and it was replaced by the USMCA in 2020. But basically, it's the same thing as it was from NAFTA. So it was just carried over into the USMCA. Interestingly, USMCA is set to be renegotiated in 2026, I believe. And so I'll be curious what the difference is between USMCA version 1 and USMCA version 2 as it relates to TN visas will be. But it is set to be renegotiated in 2026. So that's something to keep an eye out. The duration of the TN visas from 1 to 4 years at the consulate or at the port of entry in the consulate in Mexico or the port of entry in Canada. This is one of the differences in the application processes. If the individual is from Mexico, then they have to go through consular processing. If they're from Canada, they go to a port of entry and present their application to a CBP officer. They can also be renewed while the individual is in the United States for up to 3 years, and they can do so indefinitely so long as the employment remains temporary. There's a whole bunch of eligible professions, and so if you would be interested in seeing that, I think that we have the list of professions on our website. But it's pretty comprehensive. These are some of the ones that we see most often are engineers, veterinarians, animal scientists, animal breeders, and accountants, but there's a whole bunch of them on there. So if you're looking at any profession in particular, then I would look at the comprehensive list, or you just ask us and we'd be happy to tell you. Generally, they require a degree. There's certain categories that don't necessarily require a degree, but they would require a particular amount of work experience. So there's a consultant category that you can achieve through related experience. But the one thing that I've seen is that those that supplement the experience for the education have an even worse approval rate than the ones that have the education right now. So I'm generally recommending against trying to achieve a TN visa approval, at least from Mexico, whenever that TN visa is relying upon work experience in any category. Here we go. So let's talk a little bit about the consulate denial trend. So since mid-2023, kind of maybe August-ish, the TN visa rates at the U.S. consulates in Mexico have significantly decreased. We're currently seeing industry-wide trends with approval rates of around 30%. This goes up and down a little bit depending on the month. Some months it's a higher approval rate, closer to 40%. Some months it's a lower approval rate, closer to 20%, but generally it's falling right there in the 30% range. And it's important, again, just to emphasize that this isn't specific to any particular business, any particular industry, or any particular firm. I've got a lot of friends that are immigration lawyers, obviously, and a lot of them have just different niches where they have filed TN visas for years, and they're facing the same issues, just pervasive denials. And the causes of it, like we talked about earlier, were increased scrutiny on job descriptions, applicant qualifications, or maybe some shift in immigration policies, specifically from the consulate. The real issue with the causes, though, is that it's not very coherently communicated to us or industry professionals, trade organizations, or otherwise, what's actually causing the denials. And that's one of the issues, is that whenever you don't know where the goalposts are, it's really hard to kick towards them. And so I think over time, that's one of the things that we'll see. I think that we'll see clearer and clearer guidelines for TN visas. They'll be more specific about what they're looking for. But right now, one of the things that we hear from the consulate all the time is, okay, we'll make sure that the job description is consistent with the Department of Labor's Field Occupation Handbook and or ONET, sorry. But that's not real. I mean, if you look at the data, whether your job description perfectly matches it or not, the denial rates are not significantly different. The consulate has just been, in my opinion, very arbitrarily denying these and have very inconsistent reviewing practices on TNs. I think that over time it's going to become more refined, but I do think that it's important to get to that point that trade organizations, businesses that have a vested interest in TN approvals, put pressure on the consulate, preferably through whatever your trade organization is, to provide clear guidelines on how they are reviewing these applications and document your rationales for why you're seeing denials, what the individuals are telling you versus what the consulate is giving them on their form. And so that's one of the things that we do every time is if we have a candidate that was denied or approved, we call them after their application. We say, hey, tell us about your appointment. A lot of times they'll say, no, they didn't even look at my packet. They just asked me what I'm going to be doing, and they said, no, that's not a TN category, which it's not true whenever they go there. And so I expect this to become more refined, more specific, but I do expect it to be a bumpy ride. I don't think this is something that's going to be resolved this year. I don't think it's going to be something that's likely going to be resolved next year. I think it's going to be a bumpy ride through next year, and hopefully some trade organizations really apply some pressure. One thing I'll be interested to see, though, is just chronologically here. In 2026, it's being renegotiated. I think it's entirely possible that part of the renegotiation provides clear guidance for when these applications should be approved and when they should not, and what enforcement mechanisms the U.S. government has to enforce the proper usage of TN individuals. If they were able to overcome that second element, the enforcement mechanism, then they wouldn't be so concerned about the approval, because what they would basically say is, okay, if we approve them and they go in and we find out that they're doing something wrong, we will revoke the visa, we will fine the employer, all sorts of different options. Right now, they just don't have that really. So I think that that's their big hesitation, and I do think they might be trying to slow roll this into 2026 so that whenever USMCA is renegotiated, they are able to say, okay, hey, we need some sort of enforcement mechanisms or some additional approval processes to ensure that we are not handing out TN visas to people that are not going to be engaged in professional level activity as required by the TN regulations. Let's say that you're an employer and you have had a terrible time with TN approvals. There's other types of ways of getting people onto TN visas. They wouldn't be coming through the consulate, though. They come through what's called either a change of employer or a change of status filing. A change of employer happens whenever a TN visa worker is working for one employer and then they go work for another employer, and the TN visa is transferred from employer A to employer B. The other circumstance is what's called a change of status. So oftentimes we're able to locate people within the United States that maybe have an H-2A visa, an H-2B visa, or a B-2 visa, and they're in the United States. They have the qualifications for becoming a TN, and we can place those people with their employer, and we can file a USCIS application to either change their status or change their employer. So this is one of the things that we've started to do, is we've started to heavily look for individuals that are currently in the United States with the qualifications necessary to get a TN for our clients. And this has a significantly higher approval rate. And we've continually maintained over 98% approval rate for both change of employer and change of status petitions filed through the USCIS. This is one of the most obvious parts that demonstrate the consulates inappropriately applying the TN regulations. Now, the USCIS isn't afforded that luxury, because if the USCIS denies a TN visa, you can appeal it. You can appeal the denial. But if the consulate denies a TN visa, their only means of appealing it is to reapply. And so whenever you see a large discrepancy between the USCIS, who's forced to abide by the law, and the consulate, who's not, it tells you that the consulate's the one misapplying it, not the USCIS. So very powerful tool there. This is how the change of status process works. So change of status allows individuals already in the United States on one visa type, H-2As, for example, or H-2Bs or B-2s, to transition to a TN status without leaving the United States. So they would go from their old status to their new status while they're here. To do this, the employer has to submit a Form I-129 to the USCIS to request change status from their prior visa to TN. And it requires all the same documentation as that you would with a change of employer. You got to be able to demonstrate maintenance of status, qualifying profession, the individual's credentials, all that sort of stuff. And the nice thing about it is it doesn't leave it up to the discretion of the consulate in Mexico to determine if this person is eligible for the TN or not. The USCIS does, and they have been significantly more favorable than the consulate. So here's some important details, because oftentimes we have clients that are referring us people for change of status filings. The TN worker must maintain valid status and currently hold a valid I-94 with sufficient validity for the TN petition to be processed. They need to. One thing that we've seen before, I guess just to be more specific, is where someone is eligible for a TN. Let's say that they were on an H-2A visa and they held an engineering degree, and their H-2A visa expired, and instead of leaving the United States, they looked for a TN employer. And whenever this depends on the visa categories. I'm using H-2A intentionally, but H-2A workers are generally afforded 10 days to get from their place of employment back to Mexico, for example. And let's say that this TN visa worker found an employer, and employer submitted the I-129 12 days, 11 days, 12 days, doesn't matter, after their H-2A expired, 1 day after their I-94 expired. Well, what the USCIS would do is they would deny the application, because they would say that the worker failed to maintain status, and this would require consular processing. And so it's important that they have a valid I-94 at the time the I-129 is filed. It's also important. So I guess just to read this next one, if it is a TN worker coming to you from another employer, they've got a 60-day grace period. And so it's important that you know, okay, how long does this person have based off their degree category? And if you have any questions with that, we're happy to help. But yeah, so anyways, the process is clear. You got to be able to maintain status. You got to be able to show the individual's qualifications and all that with the I-129 filing. And then this is, I'm sure a lot of people here are familiar with the automatic visa revalidation, but it's actually something that I did want to go over real quick. Automatic visa revalidation is a special provision that allows individuals on certain non-immigrant visas, including TN visas, for Canadian and Mexican citizens to re-enter the United States with an expired visa, so long as they have a valid I-94 in the same category that the visa was originally issued. This can be a helpful option because the visa expires, but you have your I-94, and the worker's still able to go from the U.S. to Mexico on a short trip and then re-enter. The automatic visa revalidation applies for trips of fewer than 30 days. I always recommend no longer than 3 weeks because it is up to the CBP officer, and oftentimes the closer you get to 30 days, the less they exercise that discretion. And then once the worker arrives back in the United States, I always suggest that you check the worker's I-94. I would check it both before and after they re-enter. Before to make sure they can re-enter, and after they re-enter to make sure that the CBP officer didn't shorten the I-94. We've seen that a lot of times. And I think that we'll get into that more in a second. Yeah, we will. If your employee applies for a new visa in Canada or Mexico while they're on their short travel period, then automatic visa revalidation is not going to apply anymore. And we've seen that. We've seen it to where employee says, hey, employer, I'm going out of the country to visit family. They go out of the country, they go to the consulate, they apply for another TN visa for another employer, and then they're denied. And they try to come back on their I-94 for the employer that they told that they were going home to see family, and they are not able to re-enter because they sought a new visa. Okay, so here's some important tips for TN employers and TN visa holders. This is what I was talking about a second ago. Each time your employee re-enters the United States, ensure that the expiration on the I-94 hasn't been updated or shortened by CBP. This happens all the time. And if it has, you can check with us because we may be able to request a correction depending on the CBP officer's discretion. But it is important to always check that, because we've seen it where we've seen two separate circumstances happen. Circumstance one, the worker has an I-94 that was previously shortened and the employer didn't notice, and the worker leaves the United States and they can't come back because they don't have a valid I-94 anymore. It expired while they were in the United States. They just had no idea because they were still relying on the old I-94. We've seen it also where the I-94 period is shortened and then the employer doesn't notice and they're looking to file an extension, and then it's really difficult because they aren't able to demonstrate that they maintain status. And so this is even more important now than it has been historically, because the likelihood of approval at the consulate is so much lower than the USCIS. And so at any time you can apply through the USCIS, you apply through the USCIS. And the I-94 being shortened is one thing that could interfere with your ability to do so. Ensure that the worker's passport is valid. We've oftentimes seen it where if the passport's expiring soon, say before the I-94, then the I-94 is shortened as well to be consistent with the passport's expiration. And so if the worker has a passport that's going to expire soon, have them go to the nearest consulate, renew it before their travel. And then this is also an important one. They cannot travel to other countries outside of Mexico or Canada. Automatic visa revalidation applies only to travel in Mexico or Canada. If your worker travels to other countries after visiting Mexico or Canada, automatic visa revalidation likely is not going to apply. Always check with our team before your worker travels, and be transparent about what their travel plans are, at least as far as you know, because we want to make sure that you don't run into any issues. Again, because the issue is that if they can't get back in, they have to go through consular processing, and then you might be out of worker because the consulate's been so difficult for approvals lately. Okay, automatic revalidation does not extend the employee's visa or change the visa's expiration date. It just extends their I-94. So they're able to still work on that I-94. They're able to still travel to Mexico and Canada on that I-94, but it doesn't actually extend the visa. There are two separate documents, the visas and the passport, and that the visa is not extended. So that's that's basically what it is. And again, it's traveling less than 30 days. I always recommend 3 weeks or less. Okay. All right. That's all we had there on the PowerPoint. I'm going to stop sharing here. Okay. So the question is, will I be providing recording for the presentation? Yeah. Yep. We always have a recording. And if you want the PowerPoint, we can also get that to you too. So the question is, wanted a candidate with a tourist visa get in trouble by entering the country with the sole purpose of applying for TN status. So oftentimes whenever we have people that are on a tourist visa, they're not coming here for the sole purpose of applying for a TN visa. They already would have the B visa for one reason or another. Usually this is to see family. So oftentimes they'll come in and apply for the TN visa because they came here to see family or to travel, and then they find an employer while they're here. What other questions might we have? Any other questions? Okay, can you talk about how one might get a TN visa for a Mexican citizen with a 3-year Technico bachelor, options in scientific technician? So if it's a 3-year degree, I don't think that they would be able to get one right now. I just don't. That it has to be a bachelor's degree or equivalent, and then the analysis oftentimes goes a little bit beyond that as well. We usually, the way that we do it, at least I can only tell you how we do it, is we look at the job description, we look at the specific professional category, we look at the transcripts of the worker, and then we mash those all together. Do you think an applicant denied at the consulate but comes in on the H-2B is at a disadvantage of applying through the USCIS? I don't actually. And we've seen that plenty, where the person was, they were denied on a TN, and that if you think about it from the worker's perspective, it's very logical. So let's say that I'm a engineer coming to work for a construction company, and they want to bring me in an engineering role, maybe some project management level role, and I'm denied that. But I could go work for that same construction company as a concrete worker and still make a lot more money than I make back home, despite my degree. And so if the consulate were to ask them, I think that the worker would be able to logically say, yeah, you guys denied my TN visa and I still want to work for that employer. So instead of taking the other better job that I was qualified for, I'm going to take the H-2B job. I don't think there's any issue with that. What happens when TN visas are denied twice because they don't have ties to their home country? How can this be worked around? Is there a specific time frame to wait until reapplying? So this is a great question. One of the big discrepancies between what the consulate is telling the individuals and the paper that they give them is the paper that they give them all says every time almost that they're being denied because they under 214B because they failed to establish their non-immigrant intent, which is what you're talking about, enough ties to their home country. And so you can, if they're denied twice, I would suspect they would be denied a third time. I would also suspect it's not actually because of ties to their home country. And I don't think there's a good time frame to reapply for them right now. And I definitely wouldn't do it until there's clear field goal post and we know where we're actually aiming. But one thing that is generally helpful with the initial application is to bring evidence that demonstrates why they would need to return to their home country. Maybe they have a wife or kids, or they own a house, or they own a car, or they own property. Anything like that is helpful for demonstrating their non-immigrant intent, and it's best to bring that on the front end. But the reality is that I'm sure your worker was told that, but that's not the actual reality. Brandon, that's a good question. We do we do these summits where we bring clients in and mainly just have fun and hang out for a few days, and then we get to talk about specific labor needs for that particular company. And the question is, when's the next one? And the answer is in November, and I'll text you about it. We've experienced denials on applicants that have previously had their TN visa but denied for their renewal. Any reason why the renewal would be denied when already approved? This is one of the most irritating things. And so this is why I'm saying that the extensions need to be done through the USCIS, because I'm seeing this all the time too. This person's had a TN visa for 9 years, and now they're being denied on their renewal when you guys have already said 3 times that they are eligible for the TN visa. The consulate is not required to give any deference to prior approvals when they're determining the approvability of a visa application. And so there's not a good reason for that. Not a good reason to force them through. There's really not much you can do. Part of the frustrating thing right now is that used to never be an issue. Employers used to send people home to go for their consulate approvals because it was, maybe a little bit cheaper. Maybe the folks wanted to go home and see their family for a month, and then they would come back, and there was no big deal. But with the approval rates how they are now, I just don't send them home for renewals. All righty. Any other? Oh, here we go. Is there a way for employers to see why their candidates are being denied if the employer has a history at the consulate? So you can file FOIA request with the consulate and get a lot of information on the review of their applications. Yeah. If that's something you need help with, just let me know. Happy to help with that. FOIA stands for Freedom of Information Act, by the way. I sometimes realize I use the word FOIA, and most people don't know what that means. And they shouldn't. I actually wish I didn't know what that means. All right. Any other questions? Nope. Okay, cool. Well, I appreciate everyone coming. We got another one. Oh, you're welcome. It said thank you. Yeah, you're welcome. So we'll have the presentation ready and the recording available to people. Feel free to give it another watch. If you have any questions for us, I'm going to just put our information here on the screen. Any questions, anything we can help with, anything we can evaluate to help see if you can leverage immigration a little bit better and make TNs more consistent, we'd be more than happy to help review that with you. You can email us. You can call us at that number right there. Please do so. Would love to help. All right. Well, thanks everyone. I appreciate the time. We'll talk to y'all soon.